how to really annoy your podcast listeners. I read a fantastic article quite a while back, and it just made me laugh because there are many things that can essentially piss off your listeners. And I wanted to go through some of the ones that I come across quite often, and I just think it's kind of funny and also something that you really need to be aware of when you are creating content for your podcast. So let's just kick it off. Alrighty, so first up, how to really annoy your podcast listener is to have crappy audio quality. Now, this is, seems like a little bit of a no-brainer. Of course, if you have audio quality that sucks, your listener is not going to appreciate it. And I have done an episode on making sure that your audio quality is good or how you can improve it with like better quality equipment and those sorts of things. When you're first starting out, you can have, not the best quality, like you don't know whether you're going to continue with podcasting. You don't want to invest in a bunch of gear. You might want to just have some sort of smaller microphone, or maybe you're just using your microphone that's attached to your laptop, built into that, something like that, just to get a feel for whether you actually want to do this long term. And that's okay. I don't want the gear to be a barrier to you actually getting started. But once you're there and once you realize I really enjoy doing this and it's going really well, then improve the equipment so that you actually start to sound a bit more professional. There's other ways you can improve the quality of your sound, like just making sure that you're in a quiet spot when you're recording. You have just the best possible setup that you can. It's tricky for me personally at the moment because I'm not in my normal house. Our house is being renovated and I don't have a space that is particularly helpful in this situation, and there's nothing really that I can do about that. So that's frustrating, but I just do my best as far as that is concerned. And you may have a similar struggle. And certainly if you say that to people too on your podcast, like, hey, I'm in the middle of renovating, then they're going to cut you a bit more slack than if this is just the quality that you're always running with. So just be aware of that, the little things that you can do to up that quality in your audio, and that's fantastic. Okay, the next thing that really pisses off your podcast listeners is badly placed ads or ads that don't align with your show. So there's a lot of talk at the moment, and I've done a few episodes on podcast advertising and how much monetization is really taking off in the advertising space. I'm going to do an episode on the difference between programmatic ads versus dynamic ads as well, just so that you can understand the difference between those. But ads are quite a frustrating thing for people, and we definitely don't want the podcasting industry to go the same way as like YouTube, where there's just lots of ads everywhere. Although I do like that with YouTube, you can obviously monetize quite quickly and that sort of thing from a creator perspective, but from a listener perspective and a watcher perspective, you don't want to be served too many ads, or you don't want to be served ads that don't make sense for the content. So that's something to be really aware of, is what kind of ads are you using in your show? Should you be using them at all? Is it really annoying your listeners? And what's the balance there? Next one is live episode recording. So this is something that can be quite a contentious issue. Some people really enjoy having that live experience, like when they've had one of their favorite podcasters has done like a live podcast event where there's lots of people in the audience and they have people up on the stage and it's, all that kind of hype around it. But it can also really be quite frustrating and annoying because you're not listening to the show like you normally would, or you can't connect with it the way you normally would. And if you're doing a lot of shows like that where you have lots of live events and you're just using that audio, it starts to diminish the actual quality of the content that is being provided. So again, there's a fine line there of like live content, and that can go for as well with live streams sometimes. So if you do a lot of masterclasses and things online and you're repurposing that content, just be aware of how much of that you're repurposing, as in how many episodes you have that sort of stuff happening for, because it does feel different to the listener, and if they hear too much of it, then it can really start to be annoying. So be aware of that moving forward. The next thing is inconsistent release dates. If you've got a podcast that you release weekly and you say you're going to release it weekly and then you're kind of all over the place with that. That can be quite hard for a listener to get used to. They want the consistency of the releases. They want them always there at Tuesday at 4 a.m. so that they can get on their bike and go for a ride and listen to the podcast certain time, certain day, etc., etc. And if you start getting a bit out of joint with that and you're not releasing on your regular schedule, then that can be frustrating for a listener, and they may start to kind of find something else, just not even realizing, find another show that releases more frequently or that has a more consistent schedule if that's something that they really are looking for in a show. The next one is too much selling in your episodes. This is one that can be quite tricky to navigate. So if you are an online course creator or someone that sells things online, maybe you're an online coach or that sort of thing, obviously you do want to sell your services on the podcast. So if you've got an offer coming up or a masterclass coming up or something that you want to let your listeners know about, it's important to do that, absolutely. But if a whole episode starts to feel like it's just selling you something, then that's something that really starts to piss off your listeners. If you have multiple episodes where you just feel like all you're saying is, look at how good my course is, or, these are the results that my people have received from doing my course, and here's them talking about it. That's okay sometimes to have that kind of testimonial aspect to it where you interview someone that is in your course and those sorts of things. People do quite enjoy that kind of content. That's not technically selling. It's more where it sounds like you're really trying to promote or you're desperate to sell something specifically. So that is something that I would definitely be thinking about when you're forming your episodes, and maybe they are trying to be around a particular thing that you've got coming up that you want to sell. Just think about how you're talking about that in an episode, and don't make it the focus of the whole episode. Still give people value and have a mid-roll or have a call to action at the end or something else that promotes that sells that thing, and make the actual content of the episode relevant to what you're selling without it feeling selly, because that's really something that annoys listeners. Another big one is rambling episodes. So if you've got something that you want to talk about and then it just goes on the topic, and you could have said that same thing in 20 minutes, but you've been talking about it for 45 minutes, that really is quite annoying. And I really hate that personally because I'm an audio editor. I'll be like listening to it going, oh my God, they could have chopped out like 20 minutes of this, that just get to the freaking point. And that's something that is definitely frustrating. So if you've got guests on your show as well, be aware of that. Are they starting to ramble? Can you bring them back into the topic so that the listener isn't going, what? I can't even remember what the question was. Like, where is this going? You need to be aware of that so that the episodes feel succinct. Now, if you have an audio editor or production team like Bamby Media doing that for you, handling that, then that's not as big of an issue because we will listen to it and go, but boring, and cut out the stuff that perhaps is a little bit slow. But if you're not editing your episodes or you're editing them very loosely, have that thought in your head. Am I rambling? Like, am I getting to the point here? Could I wrap this up? Could I have wrapped this up 15 minutes ago? That's something that really annoys people. So be aware of that. And the last one is just being aware of that ad load that I talked about earlier. So when we're talking about placing ads in your show and ads not being relevant to your show, one of the really frustrating things and annoying listenership issues, especially for bigger shows, is when they have like a bunch of ads. They have not one ad or two ads in their mid-roll, but they have, like, let's say in the space of an hour-long episode, they've got, 3 or 4 ads in one section, and then they do a bit more talking, and then there's 3 or 4 more ads later on. Ad load is a real problem, and it will turn people off listening to your show. So play with that. Make sure that whoever's looking after the advertising for your show is aware of that issue, and knowing that you really have to just keep that in your mind so that you don't really annoy your listeners with having too many ads. They are the main things that will really annoy your listeners and to be aware of when you're creating a show, when you're getting your content planned and those sorts of things. I'll put some information in the show notes as to what I discussed here so that you're aware of what those things were again. I'll also create a transcript for this episode so you'll be able to access this on the Bamby Media website. If you just go to bambymedia.com/podcast, it will have the transcripts and those things. All the episodes are actually live there as well, so go and suss that out if it interests you. Have a good day, guys, and I will chat to you next time.